The year is 750. Abd Al-Rahman is a member of the Umayyad family that rules over the largest empire yet known to man, but he's kind of a nobody. He's the son of a prince, first cousin once removed to the last caliph, but just shy of 20 years old, he hasn't had the chance to really make a name for himself. And the entire caliphate wants him dead. So what's going on here? Well, the Umayyads made the caliphate very, very big, but what they failed to do was make everybody very happy. Shiites were still holding a grudge after what went down with Ali and Sons, and the Umayyads had this weird thing going on where they handed out tax penalties to non-Muslims for not being Muslim, but then they really didn't want anyone to convert either because they needed that tax money to survive, so you're stuck as a second-class citizen no matter what you do. And so in come the Abbasids, who were still Sunni Arabs, but a little nicer about it, and they've got a prophecy on their side. They beat the Umayyad army and kill basically everybody in the family, just getting them all out of there. So Al-Rahman's in the capital with his sons, his sister, a freedman named Bedr, and his adorably named brother Yahya. And they're packing their bags because the Abbasids leave no survivors. They hightail it east, but they soon discover the Abbasids are real sticklers to that policy when in the middle of resting up in a small village, they're nearly seized by a group of horsemen who... It's the Nazgul. Basically, they sent the Nazgul after them. They have to split up to escape, and our guy just leaves the women and children behind and runs away with his bros. And in true fellowship fashion, Abd Al-Rahman and his family are saved by a river as they all leap into the Euphrates. The horsemen chasing them stop and say, "Oi! We just want to talk to you!" And Yahya's not the best swimmer, so he says goodbye to his brother and climbs up the bank, and the Nazgul lop his head off like, wow, when was the last time that ever worked? Our dynamic duo at this point turn west, through Palestine, Sinai, and Egypt, presumably having wacky adventures involving Sparky Boom Men and Sheer Shoes and, I don't know, Christopher Armalite if you want to get real obscure. The light at the end of the tunnel was that the Abbasids weren't the only ones who had rebelled against the Umayyads. The governor of Africa had declared independence, and now, seeing a handy way to win some clout, he welcomes the young prince and connects him with a few other surviving Umayyads, all haggard from their own harrowing journeys. Governor Ibn Habib puts them in subservient positions in his government, but Al-Rahman is content to keep a low profile, living with his mother's side of the family away from the capital. And it's a lucky thing, too. In the capital, Ibn Habib looks around him and gets nervous because there is a bunch of unhappy Arabs in his realm, and some of them might want to promote the Umayyads to power. So one day, while Al-Rahman is just vibing, Ibn Habib's soldiers show up at the camp unannounced, demanding to know where the prince is. The chieftain's wife hides him and his companions under her personal belongings just long enough for the soldiers to go, "We'll let you go this time, but we'll be back." Prince Al-Rahman is grateful to be alive, but he can't afford to stay. The problem is that there's only one place left in his former dominion, and it ain't pretty. Al-Andalus, modern-day Spain, was a hostile place even if you weren't a fugitive. The land was reeling from a recent revolt. There were constant tensions between Arabs and Berbers, even between Qasid Arabs and Yemeni Arabs. As it happens, Al-Rahman was a Qasid, and the nominal ruler of Al-Andalus wasn't just a Yemeni. He was the same family as the governor of Africa who just signed his death warrant. But the Umayyad family had a few old clients living in the frontier, so he sent Bedr to arrange some meetings. First, he hits up the Qassids, who supported a general named Al-Sumail, but Al-Sumail is afraid of Al-Rahman trying to take power for himself, so he doesn't let him into the club. But Bedr doesn't return empty-handed. Instead, he has some interesting news. Desperate times and desperate measures, Bedr tells Al-Rahman he struck up a conversation with some Yemeni commanders, and it was awkward. The commanders were anxious. Al-Rahman is young, inexperienced, a known enemy of the Abbasids, but they didn't feel confident about their chances living under the current governor or under the Qasid/Syrian contingent, so with nothing to lose, they made a deal. He doesn't really trust them, but with nowhere else to turn, Al-Rahman goes along with it. But even transporting the prince out of Africa proved to be an ordeal. As soon as he begins to move, a group of local Berbers hold him hostage and force him to pay up to pass through without having his head sent back to the new caliph. The prince empties his purse and makes it to the sea, but not before another group runs up to stop them, and they can't afford to pay the price this time. The story goes his assailants got close enough to grab his boat, but someone on board chopped off the hand on the stern. Finally passing the Pillars of Hercules, all he can do is place his trust that the men waiting on the northern shore are truly on his side. And while it would bring me unending joy to leave you with, they cut his head off. The end. He's greeted like royalty. His clients brought him an escort of 300 cavalry, and as they bring him into town, waves of people come flocking to him. It turns out he's quite a bit more popular than the governor who refused to leave office, so Kassids and Yemenis alike are dying to meet him. The governor and his general would love to answer this new threat so they can go back to eyeballing each other suspiciously, but just as Al-Rahman arrives, there's trouble in northern Iberia. Zaragoza's declaring independence and the Basques in Pamplona revolt, and trying to deal with all that dealt a major blow to the Andalusian army. Meanwhile, Al-Rahman's captured Sevilla without bloodshed, and his power only grows. When the time comes, Al-Rahman meets the governor at a river outside the capital of Cordoba. The land is recovering from a drought, and now the river is overflowing its banks. It's all very dramatic and moody. The governor doesn't want to risk a big fight, so he opens with mind games. He gives his soldiers exorbitant amounts of food and orders them to have a picnic right next to the river where the enemy can see them. With Al-Rahman's army good and demoralized, he opens up negotiations and says, "You want to live here? Not a problem. My only request is that you marry my daughter and take my money, and we'll be good." But Al-Rahman is smarter than that, and he walks out. The morale thing is a real issue, though. The army is hungry, and they've noticed Al-Rahman has the nicest, fastest horse in the army for, say, if he had to flee the battlefield and run away like he's been doing for 6 years. So he goes all in. He trades his horse for a Yemeni chief's mule and preps for battle. They need a banner, so he unwraps a green turban and sticks it to a spear, creating the symbol of his new dynasty. He charges in with his banner held high. There's an epic clash, a huge victory for Al-Rahman, and he marches into Cordoba as its new ruler. The governor strikes again, but loses, and Al-Rahman tells him, "Hey, you want to live here? Not a problem. My only request is that you give me all your money and your daughter. The rest of your children too, I'm holding them hostage." Naturally, the governor tries again with whatever support he can muster and dies. Without competition, Al-Rahman makes the Emirate of Cordoba a safe haven for the Umayyads and their allies, placing the few distant relatives who survived the Abbasid purge in positions of trust across the land. One such survivor, his son. Turns out the women and children were also not fans of getting murked. Must have been one hell of a reunion. "I'm so glad to see you. I can't believe you're still alive. I mean, I knew you'd make it." Meanwhile, in faraway Baghdad, the caliph is turning around in his swivel chair, stroking his pet cat, fuming over this unexpected turn of events. There's even this great monologue of his that got written down. He brings in his henchman and asks, "Tell me, who is the falcon of the Quraysh, the foremost of the Prophet's tribe?" And they go, "You, O commander of the faithful?" "No, not I." "Then your great predecessor, Muawiyah." "Fools! Muawiyah rose through the support of Umar and Uthman, myself through the struggle of my kin. But Abd Al-Rahman escaped by his cunning. The spearheads of lances and the blades of our swords had the boldness to seek his fortune without an army in lands unknown to him beyond the sea, and founded under his scepter a great empire in a realm as good as divided." And then I like to imagine he was all like, "You will bring him to me." For what it's worth, Al-Andalus was still a mess when Al-Rahman took hold of it, but he did his best to improve it. He built new mosques, like this really beautiful and famous one in Cordoba. He made a bunch of aqueducts, but Zaragoza was still unhappy. They got help not from the hand-steepling caliph, but from the Christians, i.e. the Franks, i.e. Charlemagne himself. But after they managed to defeat Al-Rahman's general by themselves, they told Charlemagne to take a hike because they were a little worried he might try to take the city for himself, which, when you look at his track record, is not an unreasonable assumption to make. Charlemagne kidnaps the city's leader, who ends up escaping, but Al-Rahman says to the escapee's brother, "You could have the city if you pledge loyalty to me." And he kills his brother and pledges loyalty for less than 2 years. Then he declares independence, and Al-Rahman says, "Screw it," and rains hell with 36 siege engines. Then, of course, there was the matter of the caliphate, the ones who massacred his family and stole away his home. Perhaps he thought to himself, perhaps, just as he fought his way west, he could fight his way back east. But then he died. The end!